This episode is part 2 of last week's pod, where I continue to look at how to improve your horse's movement. We'll look at some often missed root causes for unhealthy biomechanics and the most important conversations you need to have with your horse and able to improve how your horse moves. So here we go. Episode 136, Improve Your Horse's Movement, part 2. Hi, I'm Karen Rohlf, and welcome to Horse Training in Harmony. This podcast is about you making progress with your horse in a way that you both can love. It's about learning how to move and be in harmony. Because yes, you really can develop a horse to be both athletic and happy. When we show up as our best selves for our horses will show up for us. So, let's get started. This episode and the last one mirror a laser training video series that I released this month, and you can find that at dressagenaturally.net/laser. Now, if you're listening to this episode months after its original release, there's no guarantee that that page will actually still be active. But in the last episode, we talked about choosing our adjectives. So we looked at our horse now, and we chose the adjectives that we'll use to describe our horse and how they move now. And then we also chose the adjectives that we would like to be able to use to describe how our horse moves. We also talked about the difference between healthy and unhealthy ways of moving. And when it came to the unhealthy ways, we looked at the difference between active and inactive unhealthy biomechanics, which is basically the inactive is sort of the horse that's kind of plopping around being unathletic. And the active unhealthy biomechanics is when there's like active anxiety, active contraction, active conflict between the horse and the rider. Things are sort of actively going wrong. And we talked about a very important point, which is that it can change. So a lot of times when we look at our horses, it's easy to go, oh, that horse is unathletic, or this horse is really flat, and this horse is really tense. But, maybe so in the moment, but it can change. It can change quite dramatically, actually. So in this episode, I'm going to talk about an important root cause for unhealthy biomechanics, and we will talk about how to actually start improving the way your horse moves. And all of these ideas are really super simple concepts. And that's why I called it a laser video training series, because I tempted myself to find the most simple concepts and explain them in the most simple way. Because like many things that are simple or seemingly obvious, those things are often overlooked. So we don't want to overlook them. They're actually really important. So after we've assessed our horse and we know what we're seeing and where we want to go, and we've kind of been able to assess, are they moving in a healthy way or in an unhealthy way? And more importantly, like when are they moving in those different ways? Because they don't always move the same way, right? On a nice cool morning, they're going to maybe move differently than on a really hot day, or they might move differently under saddle than they do out in the pasture. So we looked at when our horses are moving in these different ways. Now I want you to think about why. So in those moments where they're not moving in the most healthy way, or when they're moving closer to the picture for unhealthy biomechanics, I want you to start thinking about why. And, I know it's like, I don't know, Karen, that's why I'm listening to this podcast. So here are the things you want to look at, because the most commonly overlooked factor is trust, communication, and motivation as a root cause. So we need to start with trust, communication, and motivation, because fear, confusion, feelings of helplessness, and boredom actively work against the posture we're trying to create. Dressage problems are not always dressage problems. And strong aids and force simply don't work on a horse who is bored or scared or confused. But too often, people only address the symptom, that unhealthy biomechanics, instead of the cause. And sometimes a physical issue is a physical issue. But if you don't rule out or address trust, communication, or motivation, you won't ever really break the cycle of unhealthy movement. Even inside the Finding the Sweet Spot of Healthy Biomechanics course, we spend the first 2 modules really looking at foundational communication and partnership and trust, because it's that important. So when you start thinking about this, observe your horse and just ask yourself, why did it change? Like, why did they go from prancing in the field and then in the arena they're all flat? Like, why? Is that a motivation issue, or is it a communication issue, or is it a trust issue? And I want you to take just your best guess. Just kind of feel into it and which one of those pops into your head the quickest. And then, of course, we can talk about it and how to figure out. But you can think of trust is anything to do with fear. So, and that can be, from you or your horse, right? So if there's fear anywhere between the two of you or in one of you, it's going to affect the whole relationship, and then it's going to affect how your horse moves. Now, fear can sometimes, or trust issues can sometimes look like balkiness, or they could look checked out. They could get rigid as they get defensive. They could be anxious and prancing. They could be like running away. So it can be a little bit tricky, because they could either be getting really hectic or they could be getting really rigid and frozen. So I want you to feel into it and see what your gut tells you. Now, a communication issue is something around confusion, right? They don't understand. You ask them to do something and they didn't do it. So it might be that they didn't really understand what you said in the first place. Now, when there's a communication issue, horses can appear checked out. Other ones will get anxious, and kind of the overachieving anxiousness, right? There's some like real people pleasers, and when they don't know the answer, they start throwing everything at you. How about this? How about this? How about this? Like, I don't know what you're asking, but I'll just throw everything out there and see if you like any of it. So, but a lot of times the communication is just a confusion. They didn't quite do the thing that you thought you asked for. And if it's a motivation issue, that's when your horse understands, but they still don't do it, or they're putting in a minimal effort. And now this is where it gets tricky also, because sometimes horses put in a minimal effort because of lack of understanding, right? So sometimes I get the feeling from horses that they think, well, I think this is what she wants, so I'll sort of do it. And then if they think, well, I didn't get rewarded, but I didn't get punished, so I'll just kind of hedge my bets and kind of do this thing, right? So that could be a lack of understanding. They weren't really sure, but it could be interpreted as a motivation issue. He's just being lazy. Well, maybe, but maybe he doesn't understand. So this is where, there's 3 totally separate issues, but they often, as they manifest, they can overlap, and one can run into the other. You could imagine also that lack of communication can turn into a trust issue. If you're always confusing your horse and they never get the answer right, they will start to lose trust in you as a leader and the situation. So some of these will feed into the other ones of them. Some of them is, it's a trust issue, but the root cause is actually communication, or vice versa. So this is, you could spend we do spend our lifetimes trying to figure this stuff out if we're thinking of it. So the first thing is to make sure that even if you have a focus of improving how your horse moves and their biomechanics and their posture, you still need to make sure you're asking yourself this question, especially if your horse's biomechanics suddenly changed. right? Did it change because of a trust issue, a communication issue, or a motivation issue? And so this is going to be, your grand homework is trying to figure out, how do you tell with your particular horse? Because like I said, some of the symptoms are the same. Some horses get balky when they're out of trust. Some horses get balky when they're confused, and some horses get balky when they're not motivated. So what's showing up, it's not a direct, always if the horse does this, it's always a that. So you're going to have to get to know your horse. So really be looking all the time of what does your horse look like when they start to feel fear? You'll notice it. I think it's easier to talk about in the specifics when something just happened than to do a dissertation on horses in general, right? I mean, there's some signs, obvious signs that you can see, a horse whose head is straight up and their eyes are bugging out, probably feeling some fear. But it's the subtle versions that I think are the ones that become really important, right? Everybody knows if your horse spins and spooks, but it's the horse that has subtle, chronic trust issues and never does anything too bad, but it's still a trust issue. So start to notice when, on the scale of trust or fear, when do things slide up the scale and when do they slide down the scale? Can you tell the difference of going from, a 5 to a 6 as far as trust or fear, however you want to think about it? And the same thing with communication. Now, those of you who have followed my stuff or in the video classroom or other courses, I do what I call my silly horse tricks. And that word silly is in quotes because I don't think they're silly. They're actually very powerful. Very simple things, often using positive reinforcement, but that's not necessarily. But things like touch your nose onto this thing or put your foot in the bucket, things like that could be called tricks. But where they're helpful for me is to identify my horse's learning process, because there are things that your horse can learn that are very distinct. Your horse knows when they got it right. You know when they got it right. There's not a shadow of a doubt, right? The foot's either in the bucket or it's not in the bucket. Right? There's no confusion there. And so in the process of learning something like that, you'll probably see your horse have moments of, I don't understand what I'm supposed to do. And then you'll see the moment where they go, I totally know what I have to do, and I totally know when I got it right. And that look on their face when you see the feeling of, I know exactly what I'm supposed to do, and I know that I got it 100% right, is priceless. Because now you know what your horse looks like when they're confused, when they're learning, and when they totally know that they've nailed it and there's no communication problems. So I find playing with my horses with those little tricks really help me in my training process with them when things do get more vague and more physically demanding and more complicated, like more cadence in the half pass, right? So think about, how are you going to tell? How do you know with your horse when there's clarity with communication and when there's an issue of communication? And then same thing with motivation. So motivation, one of the ways you can tell if it's a motivation issue is if you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that they actually do understand what you're asking them to do, and you absolutely do know that they're not in a state of fear at the moment. I think we've all experienced that there's some things that we totally understand how to do it, we're able to do it, but if we're in a moment of fear or anxiety, we still can't do it. It just doesn't work. Like, we're fumbling, we're uncoordinated, or we're frozen or tense, or for whatever reason, or our brain, we're distracted. And the stuff that we normally can do, we're simply not able to do. Right? So when we're afraid. So if you want to test the communication, your horse has to be in a calm moment. And so if you're in a calm moment and you've already proven to yourself that you absolutely know your horse totally understands this communication you're giving them, and they're still not doing it, then you can think, well, this has got to be a motivation issue then, right? Because there's no other reason. A lot of times people will, by default, see it as a motivation issue, but then think the answer is always, come on, you lazy horse, you have to do it because I said so. And that's not really a motivational strategy. That's just a control strategy. When I do this, you have to do that, and you're going to do it. So motivation is the art of trying to figure out how to cause that horse to eagerly offer it when given the chance. And, there's an art to it. It takes practice. So, but you don't want to judge whether or not it's a motivation issue unless you're sure that they do understand it and you're sure that they're calm. So that will make things maybe a little bit easier. The thing that always has to jump as number one thing to ask is there trust? If there's fear in the air from you being afraid of the situation or the environment or your horse is afraid of you or the situation or the environment, like everything else is going to go out the window. You've got to solve that first. And so to solve things like trust issues, you've got to be trustworthy. You've got to be patient and calm and be a clear leader. You've got to be able to see things from their perspective and commit to proving to them that they're safe in ways that they understand. And although some trust issues are very specific and distinct, like, oh, I don't trust that corner of the arena. I don't trust that thing over there. A lot of times, trust is really about your daily habits. It's about consistency. It's about who you are and all the little decisions you make throughout your day as your horse slides up and down the scale of how okay they are and what you're doing about it, so that when something big comes along, you've got some, relationship in the bank account, right? So really think about your daily habits, your daily relationship with your horse. Habits for Excellent Horsemanship course is where I really talk a lot about that. And so, that's really the deep, long-term, there's no quick technique for that. I mean, there's definitely techniques, but there's no quick fix. It's kind of who you are and how you make your decisions. For communication, I've got lots of resources on communication. Excellent communication helps you be a trustworthy leader, right? So when your horse needs you, you're able to talk to them. But, excellent communication to me sounds like, hey, horse. And they're like, yes. And then you say, would you do this thing? And they say, sure. Is this enough? Like this? And then you say, yes, thank you. So anything other than a conversation that sounds like that has room to improve in the communication department. And with motivation, it's really about thinking, why should he? Why should your horse do whatever it is that you're asking them to do? If your horse doesn't do what you ask, he either doesn't understand, so it's a communication issue, or he doesn't like what you're offering. He doesn't like what you're paying him to do it. He doesn't see the benefit. It doesn't feel like fun. So find more ways to reward your horse and reinforce the behavior, and find maybe different circumstances where it's a more inspiring area to go do whatever it is you're trying to do. Sometimes the best way to improve your horse's dressage is to get him out of the dressage arena. Do it going down the trail. Find the easiest moment to do the thing that you would like him to do. And bottom line, teach your horse that the harder he tries, the sooner he gets whatever it is he wants, whether it's rest or cookies or, to go jump that jump over there and gallop up that hill, whatever it is. What does he like? And what does he like so much that he's willing to work and do something to get it? All right, so that's just a little bit of some hints to get you going. I think there's a lot there in just the noticing. So I know I gave you some hints about how to identify it, maybe where to look to start to solve it. But I really think the power is in the simplicity of noticing and asking yourself, what is it? I wonder what it is in this moment. That's so weird. My horse just suddenly got really springy. Like, why today are they springy? Oh yeah, I'm out on the trail and they're really happy, or yeah, I was really sitting in the middle today and so my aids were much clearer, or whatever it is. I really had a picture in my mind today. I really had a plan. So pay attention, and when things change, either for the positive or for the negative, ask yourself, was it trust, communication, motivation? What just changed? Okay, now let's talk about the circumstance where your horse does trust you and you have a bunch of communications in place and you know how to get your horse to go, hey, what are we doing today? Let's do it. All right, so he's motivated. Now you can start thinking about, let's see if we can actively improve our horse's biomechanics. So when I'm starting young horses or working with new horses, that's exactly what I do. I don't jump right into changing their bodies. I'll go through exactly the process I went through with you in my mind. Some horses, that process takes, some time, and sometimes it's really quick. It's like in 5 minutes, I can kind of zip through that and kind of assess and know where I am and check things off and go, okay, maybe I'm ready to go, okay, it is time to change their bodies. It is time to change how they move because there's no big red flags anywhere else. And so that's where we need to go, okay, now how are we going to do that? Like, what do we do? Do we start half halting and putting on our spurs and driving and holding and, moving the bit back and forth? No. So this is something that I've talked about a lot on this podcast. It's in my book. It's in everything I do. And that's finding the sweet spot of healthy biomechanics. And in a nutshell, it's about being really good at talking to your horse about 3 key conversations. And that's the conversation about relaxation, energy, and balance. Because if you've got a happy camper little horse and now you want to change how they move, those are the dials you're going to be turning. You're either going to need to tell them to calm down a little bit. If they're getting hyped up, you're going to have a gas pedal where you might need to raise the energy or lower the energy, and you're going to need to shift their balance. You're going to need to ask them to move their shoulders a little right or left, their whole body right or left, or just their haunches right or left. And you might ask them to want to come up and back and carry more weight on their hind end, or you might invite them to stretch down and let go a little bit of that collection. So the 3 conversations you're going to need are relaxation, energy, and balance. But the other key part of finding the sweet spot of healthy biomechanics is not that we go, okay, they need this much energy, this much relaxation, and this much balance, and now I'm going to put them there. No, it's not about putting the horse in a perfect shape. Trying to do that usually leads to tension and paralyzing self-criticism. So the key is to have a playfulness. It's going to work better than perfectionism. It's about finding that sweet spot. It's a movement dynamic based on this certain combination of relaxation, energy, and balance. For each horse, on each day, in each movement, there's a certain combination. And when you get in that, what I call the sweet spot of relaxation, energy, and balance, it will feel like your horse is saying, oh, I can move more freely here. I can move more fill in the blank here. And it feels amazing. And you're going to be saying, and I'm not doing anything to get it or to keep it. So the idea is that the sweet spot of healthy biomechanics feels good to the horse because aligned will feel better than crooked, right? And freedom feels better than constriction. Now, I know sometimes people are thinking, yeah, but if you're used to being crooked and then someone puts you straight, it will feel weird. It actually won't feel good. And I get that, but it will operate better. So here's the difference between trying to make the perfect half halt to get your horse in the perfect shape versus playing with your horse in a way that you have curiosity and you think to yourself, I wonder what energy level is the best for this horse on this day in this moment. I wonder what body part is out of alignment. Because horses are complicated. Sometimes it's not just the left shoulder sticking over to the left. Well, why? Maybe it's because the hind end is doing something weird, or maybe it's because the rib cage is stuck in a position, or the neck is pointing in a weird way. So no matter how much experience you have, you're going to play with this. And you're going to play with different levels of energy. And you're going to play with different balance shifts, not to hold them there, but just to say, hey, could you move your shoulder over here for a moment? And then you let it go. And so if you imagine, we'll think about alignment first, the balance. If your horse is crooked with their shoulders over to the left, more to the left than any other body part, that's where they're normal, that's familiar, that sort of feels quote unquote good because it feels where they're used to being. That's where they go if you let them go there. And then if I took that horse with the shoulders crooked to the left and I made them perfectly straight, then perfectly straight would feel weird to them, and they'd say, that feels weird. I need to get back where my shoulders are over to the left. And they're going to start trying harder to get over there. But contrast that with this idea. Your horse has their shoulders a little to the left. You actually play with that. You go, let me really understand that. And maybe you ask them to move a little more to the left with their shoulders, just so you can become more aware of it. And then you try to recreate the opposite of that. Can I mirror image that and go past midline, past aligned, and go all the way to their shoulders or more to the right than any other of their body parts, knowing that that's going to be really hard and awkward and challenging for your horse to get there. So you do it with great patience. You do it like the best yoga teacher on the planet. And you don't ask them to hold it there. You just say, could you go there? Would you go there? Thank you so much for trying to go there. And you release it. And when you release it, here's what's going to happen. They're going to go right back to their normal crookedness, and you let them do it. And then you go with it there. You join them there. And then you say, and now, would you just give this a try? I'll make it easy. I'll go all the way to the walk or the halt if you have to do it. And I'm going to move your shoulders all the way past midline, overshoot the target. I'm going to play with them over on this other side gently with patience and compassion. And then I'm going to release it. And if you do it in this way that's very friendly and playful and with curiosity, what ends up happening is your horse is passing through a more aligned place. So they now have choices. They have a choice between their familiar crooked, and then they pass through aligned on their way to the opposite of that. And then they also pass through it on the way when you release them from that, on their way back to their crookedness. And so when they're moving, they get to get feedback. And at some point, even though their old crookedness feels familiar, they're going to start noticing that they actually move more freely in this somewhere in the middle between the two. And this is the real magic of this protocol. Now, there's some psychology and timing of when you give the break and how you do this. And we do this for energy, and the relaxation also. But there's this playfulness that happens where you allow the horse some possibilities of movement and you let them choose. And I never get tired of feeling this feeling of the horse on their way back to their normal crookedness. They hesitate a minute and they go, can I just stay here? Because I can move more freely here. And that's the moment they blow out. And that's the moment they stretch. That's the moment they get more springy and more free and calmer and everything. It feels like the sweet spot. And in that moment, when I ask the rider, what are you doing now? They're like, I'm not doing anything. Because the work was to tempt them to do this opposite movement. And as soon as they give it a try, you go to neutral, you release and let them do whatever they want. So in that moment that they hook on to that alignment because they feel it in their body, they go, I'd like to stay here because it feels better. I can move more freely. That's a moment of release from the rider. So So it's a silly little concept, but oh my gosh, this is everything. This is so much the heart of the protocol that we do in Dressage Naturally, because it's a proven method for creating alignment and balance, the most basic kind, where the top line starts to let go and you start to set up this dynamic that's so positive. But it's also built into it is the idea that you're listening to your horse. You're giving them some credit. It's like, can you try this? Thank you. Now go where you want. And it changes the whole relationship. So it's based on a relationship and a partnership. And it also improves the relationship, because now your aids, your requests cause them to find a place that they feel even better than when they started. So pretty cool, huh? So this finding the sweet spot of healthy biomechanics is hugely, hugely powerful. And like I said, there's a lot of nuance to it. There's protocols, there's timings, so that you can do it in a efficient way. Sometimes horses make big changes quickly. Sometimes it takes a while, and there's a little progression that needs to happen, and kind of need to know like what size step is big enough without pushing too much. But this idea that precision arrives out of the possibility that playfulness creates is huge. And this is what will help you take these often elusive, yummy moments, these magical moments where they're like, oh my gosh, my horse feels amazing and I'm just sitting here. Like, there's a protocol to find this. And when you can find this dynamic and use your aids to help the horse find it, where the horse goes, oh my gosh, thank you so much for reminding me about my shoulder, right? This is what's going to, it's not only a prerequisite to collection, but it's going to be what helps keep the collection from turning into just contraction and tension. And it's what can actually not only help maintain your relationship as you quote unquote do dressage, but it can actually build your relationship as you start to gymnastically develop your horse. So some good homework for you right now for this section is to notice, to assess, like, how well can you talk to your horse about relaxation, about energy, and about balance? And think about those conversations like the primary colors, right? If you have yellow and blue and red, you can make every color. If you have relaxation, energy, and balance, you can create a different movement dynamic with your horse. So just take your time to assess, how well can you talk to your horse about relaxing anytime, anywhere? What's the range of levels of energy that you can have? Can you ask your horse to put in lower energy? Can you ask your horse to put in more energy? And how about balance? What are all the different ways you could shift your horse's balance? And how well does he understand them in isolation? Can he take a step to the left with his shoulders? How about a step to the right with his shoulders? How much time goes by between when you make this request and when it happens? So a request to shift balance should happen within the time it takes for that one leg to take its flight in the air, right? You can only affect a horse's leg when it lifts up, when it's in the air. So when your horse's right front foot leaves the ground, can you shift it and have it land a little more to the right or left in that time? If you make a request for more energy from your horse, how much time goes by between when you make the request and when it happens? Sometimes it's a breath. Sometimes it's 2 weeks. So without judgment, just assess. Kind of take stock. Because if you think of this little Venn diagram with these 3 bubbles of conversations, and the sweet spot is in the overlapping piece, that just right combination for you and your horse on that day. And you realize, oh, I've got a tiny little energy conversation and maybe it doesn't even overlap. Like, oh, that's easy. Now I just need to build the range of energy that I have. And so this is for you to discover. So just being aware is going to make a huge difference. And then developing it, you might go out and put a focus on, I'm just going to get really good at yields. 1, 2, 3, move your haunches. Thank you. Right? Or anytime, anywhere, can you just, game over and totally chill out and relax and drop the reins and have your horse stand there and rest. Check your gas pedal. And you might separate those, have a day of focusing on just one or just the other one until you have them all. I was going to say at your fingertips, but it's not really. Do you have them at your butt cheeks? Do you have those conversations clear between you and your horse? So I hope that helps. And it's a lot to think about. But between these last two podcasts, there's a lot of information, a lot of exercises and homework that you can do. So let me know how it goes.